the invocatory prayers. So joining your palms together. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So let's begin with the whiteboard very quickly, setting it up. So today we're going to discuss chapter number 15, which is called Purushottama Yoga. So going back, so chapter 15, which is entitled as Purushottama Yoga. So Purushottama is a combination of two words, Purusha plus Uttama. Purusha here, that supreme conscious entity or the supreme person or person in general, right? Person here means one who's conscious, one who's cognizant. In the previous chapter, in 13th chapter, we used the term Purusha. And if you remember in the 13th chapter, Krishna in text number 22 of the 13th chapter, he makes it very clear. There he talks about the entanglement of this Purusha and Prakriti. And later he specifically talks about how there is a Parama Purusha or Purusha Paraha. That's a term that he uses, specifically referring to himself, that how there is the soul and there is the super soul who is different from the ordinary Purusha. So that distinction has been made as a Param Purusha. So today we're going to understand who that Param Purusha is. So far we use the term as Paramatma or as super soul. So the word Uttama here means supreme. Tama means ignorance. Uttama means beyond ignorance, basically so pure, infallible. So Purushottama literally means supreme person, like that. So this is a very important chapter, because sometimes in the 13th chapter, the distinction between Purusha and Param Purusha, or the soul and super soul, has been little vague. Only in one specific verse, Krishna explicitly talks about it, but it may not be very clear. So in this chapter, we will clearly understand that who that Purushottama is. In fact, this chapter is one of those very, very special chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, which I personally like to call it as mini Bhagavad Gita. Again, a very small chapter, just 20 verses, but in 20 verses, we can understand the essence of the entire Bhagavad Gita. In fact, all the themes that we have discussed so far in the Bhagavad Gita, if you remember in the second chapter, we spoke about the concept of soul and transmigration of soul. We're going to talk about this in this chapter. In third, we spoke about what is karma. We spoke about what is jnana. We're going to talk about those concepts in this chapter. In the 7th, 8th, 9th chapters, we spoke about the opulence of Krishna. We're going to talk about those concepts again. So literally, all the key concepts that Krishna spoke about throughout the Bhagavad Gita are going to make their appearance in this chapter. And not just that, Krishna makes it very, very clear in this chapter about his own position, the position of the Jiva, and ultimately what is the whole the game plan here. What exactly are the Vedas trying to teach? So the entire summary of Vedic wisdom is presented in this one crisp 20-verse chapter. Therefore, it's a very, very special chapter. In fact, many people who like to memorize the Bhagavad Gita, they begin their memorization with this chapter. Not only is it small, but it comprises the essence of the entire Bhagavad Gita. So very important chapter for one to internalize, right? So this specific chapter, it begins with the first 6 verses. So the first theme that we are going to see in this chapter, Krishna is going to talk about the whole transition from the journey from matter to spirit. From matter to spirit. Right? So how this happens? So basically he talks about 2 themes, detachment and eventually surrender. Again, themes that we have already discussed. If you remember in the 7th chapter, we spoke about this theme of surrender. Who surrenders to Krishna? Who doesn't surrender to Krishna? Why do we surrender to Krishna? So that we can overcome the modes of material nature, which is blinding our vision of Krishna, so on, right? So that's very interesting, similar themes that we will see and more as well. So how does this chapter, Krishna chapter begins this chapter with a very interesting metaphor. He says, Urdhva Moolam Adhashakam Ashwadham Prahur Avyayam. So he talks about Urdhva Moola. So he talks about this very special, imperishable banyan tree whose roots are going upwards. Urdhva Moola. Moola here means roots. Urdhva means to going upwards. Urdhva Moolam Adha Shakam. So the branches of this tree are going down, right? And then he says, Adhashakam Ashwadham Prahur Avyayam, very, very old tree, imperishable ancient banyan tree. And then he says, Chandamsi Yasya Parnani. So the Vedic limbs are the leaves of these Vedas, of this tree, right? So the leaves are the Vedas, right? And specifically, Prabhupada also talks about how, what is this tree comprising of? It is basically presenting these 4 themes of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Dharma means religiosity, what to do, what not to do. Artha means what is a bona fide way of gaining prosperity by following dharma. How do I live a righteous life and gain prosperity in this world? And after doing that, how do I legitimately fulfill my desires? That is called kama. And finally, in all these attempts, when one develops maturity, how does one aspire for liberation? Dharma, artha, kama, moksha, which is the main theme of the Vedas, is what this tree comprises of, right? Ashwadham Prahur Avyayam, Chandams Yasya Parnani. Chandas here means the Vedas are the parni, the leaves, right? Yastam Vedasa Vedat. And one who knows this tree is a knower of the Vedas. Right? And then he continues that the branches of this tree extend downwards. Adhas Chodam Pratistastasya Shakha. Guna Pravudha Vishya Pravala. So, what is nourishing this tree? This tree is being nourished by the 3 gunas. So, the Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas are what that are nourishing this tree. Right? So, Sattva, Rajas, right, and Tamas. These are what that are nourishing this tree, right? And then he says, Adascha Moolani Anusantatani Karmanu Bandhini Manushya Loke. right? And these trees also has roots going, some of its roots are also going downwards, and these are bound to the fruitive action of the human society, right? And Srila Prabhupada, now the moment you talk about an inverted banyan tree, I mean, trees as far as our perception goes in this world, they grow upwards, they don't grow downwards. So what is this tree that we are talking about? So our acharyas very beautifully explain that this tree is not a real tree, but is actually a reflection of a spiritual tree, right? So this is that spiritual tree whose reflection we are observing here. So if this is the spiritual world, so what we are reading here is actually a description of the material world. And this is such a powerful metaphor, There's a beautiful story in this regard that is often quoted by our acharyas, that how this one time a person, he was standing at the banks of a river and he saw some fruits in the water, and he jumped into that water trying to pluck those beautiful fruits, but then he was not able to. All that happened was he got wet, he got drenched, and he was shivering with cold. Again he came out, again he saw those fruits were tempting, again he jumped into that water trying to look for those fruits. And when this whole attempt was happening again and again, a sadhu, a very wise soul, happened to pass by, and he looks at this person and says, "My dear innocent child or ignorant child, what are you doing? You are only troubling yourself." And he holds him by his head and moves his head up and says, look above. That is where reality is. That is where the real fruit is. That is where the real enjoyment is. So this is a very powerful story to indicate that actually what we identify with this world, this material world, actually is just a mere reflection. And Prabhupada very beautifully explains what is it, that water on which the reflection is taking place. It is the water of our egoistic, selfish desires. Our egoistic, selfish desires is that reflection on which we are seeing. In the moment a sense of selfishness comes into our perception of reality, immediately this virtual world of this, or this pseudo world of this material world is created, or this material consciousness is created, meaning that what we perceive as real happiness is actually happiness without real substance. The real substance is in spiritual consciousness or in spiritual reality, but we are looking at this material world, we are looking at the reflection of the fruit in the water, and we are falsely thinking that that is what is going to give me happiness. And in that process, all we will do is end up doing a lot of over endeavor, but never really experience happiness or genuine happiness. There may be a semblance of it, just like how a person looks at a reflection of a fruit in the water. At least at that moment, one may get a titillation that, oh, look, I'm going to enjoy, happiness. So the entire happiness that is described in this material world is just happiness in prospect of enjoyment, but it is not real enjoyment. And if you look at it, that is how, the world, all the experience that in our life, that's what it teaches, that a lot of enjoyment from a material perspective happens only in anticipation, but when we actually come in contact with whatever we think is going to make us happy, very soon the mind is going to lose its interest in that and we look for something else, right? So that is the nature of reality. Yeah, sometimes it may last for a moment, sometimes it will last for a day, sometimes it will last for a year, right? But eventually it's all going to dwindle away. So that's when we use the expression that it is only a semblance of happiness, this is how we are supposed to understand it. So these two verses are actually talking about that description of this reflection, which is the reality without any substance, which is what we call as material reality or material consciousness. And then he continues saying that how narupa masyeha tatopalabhyate, that rupa, one cannot perceive the form of this tree, right? And no one can understand it. Nata na anta na cha adir na cha sampratishta. No one can know where does this tree begin, where does this tree end. It is literally everywhere. Even right now, look around, right? Literally, I'm asking you, look around this room, right? And in your own room, and do you notice some tree around you, right? But actually, we are trapped in this tree. We are living in this tree. We don't even know that this reflection is there all around us, right? Ashwadhamenam sa virudha moolam asanga shastrin. So this, asanga shastrin dridena chitva, that with determination, right? So no one can know the origin of this tree. So the existence, the origin, the end of this tree is imperceptible, right? So what are we supposed to do? What is the right approach, right? So sometimes when you are, if you've ever been working with yarn, or knitting or even stitching, sometimes when the thread gets entangled, right? So what are we supposed to do? If you sit down and start disentangling the, it may take forever, and sometimes you may not even be able to do it. So the wisdom lies in just cutting it off, right? So that is what Krishna is talking about here. Asanga shastrena dridena chitva. So what is the right approach? With determination, Krishna is saying asanga shastrena. Asanga here means, sanga here means attachment. Asanga here means detachment. So with determination, with the weapon of detachment, and dridhena chitva, dridha, be determined. So with determination, right, we are supposed to cut down, determination, cut down this tree, right, with the weapon of detachment. Right? So very, very important. So two important terms. We need to be determined, and we need to develop that kind of a detachment from this world, right? So then he says that such a person, thereafter, tatah padam tat parimargitavyam yasmin gata na nivartanti bhuyaha. Parimargitavyam, go traverse that path. So what is the real purpose of detachment is very beautifully highlighted in the next couple of verses, right? So detachment from this world, it is not just about isolating yourself from this world, but rather, when one is liberated from this world, when you are, just like, for example, when a person is in the prison, right? So when one escapes from a prison, or when is released from a prison, what happens? One actually goes back to one's real home, right? So therefore, Krishna is saying that thereafter one must seek the place from which, having gone, one never returns, and there surrender to that Supreme Personality of Godhead, right? Tameva chadyam purusham prapadye. Go surrender unto that Purusha. Yataha pravritti prasthita purani, from whom everything has extended since time immemorial. So the real purpose of detachment is so beautifully explained. What is real detachment, right? So real detachment, right? It begins, or it manifests with complete spiritual attachment. So these two concepts are so beautifully highlighted, and this is a very important theme. So in imagine if our spiritual life is like a journey, right? And we have our vehicle that needs to go ahead, right? So there are these two forces that are applied. So there is a pulling force, and there is a pushing force, right? So if detachment is like that pushing force that is pushing you from behind, get out, get out, get out. But that in itself is not sufficient. we also need a pulling force, which is spiritual attachment. In fact, the whole purpose of detachment is to develop that attachment, as I mentioned earlier. So we need both this pushing and pulling forces to move the car of our spiritual life ahead, right? And that is when there's a balance of this both pushing and pulling forces, when there's a balance of this detachment and attachment, right? So that is when it leads to real surrender, right? And like that, and surrender to whom? To surrender to that Purusha. So surrender to that absolute truth. Right? So this is such a profound concept, something that has not been very explicitly mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita so far. We've heard, in for example, in the direct section like Bhakti Yoga in the 9th chapter and 10th chapter, surrendering to Krishna has been highlighted. But the very idea of the real purpose of detachment as spiritual attachment, and this combination is what is leading to surrender to the absolute truth, is so emphatically stated in this specific chapter, like that. So then Krishna talks about, what does it take to surrender, right? So is surrender such an easy process? No. So these are the characteristics that a practitioner needs to have. He says nirmana moha jitasanga dosha. So mana means pride or prestige. So one should be free from prestige. Nirmana moha, from prestige and illusion. And jita sanga dosha, so also giving up false association. By false association means here association that is binding us further to this material world. So association plays such an important role. If you remember, in the 10th chapter we discussed, when one understands Krishna's supremacy, mattah, when understand aham sarvasya prabho mattah sarvam pravartate, when understands Krishna the source of this both material and spiritual worlds, right? And one starts to surrender to Krishna. How does that surrender process begin? Machitta madgata prana bodhayanta parasparam. One starts to interact with like-minded people in that right company. So association is such an important thing that is contributing to this surrender process, right? And this is adhyatma nitya vinivritta kama. Then one who understands the eternal, who are done with vinivritta kama, giving up this whole materialistic desires, and who are free from dvandver vimukter sukha dukkha samyar. Right? So I'm actually reading all the characteristics that are spoken in text number 5. Right? Very, very important. What does it require to surrender? Right? Free from the dualities of happiness and distress, and who, unbewildered, know how. Such a person knows how to surrender to the Supreme Person. Gachanti amuda padam avyayam tat. They are the ones who will be traversing this path of surrender to the absolute truth. Right? Very, very important characteristics that are spoken about here. And then after describing that, Krishna gives a very, very amazing verse. He describes the spiritual world. A whole description of spiritual world is going to come here. He says, Natad bhashepe shuryo na shanko na pavakaha yad gatva nivartante tad dhama paramam mama. That abode, tad dhama paramam, my param dhama. Param means supreme. Dhama, my abode, is such a powerful abode that one does not need. That supreme abode of mine is not illuminated by the sun or the moon, na suryo, na shishanko, na pavakaha, nor fire, right? So which means that whole spiritual world is so illuminated, is self-illuminated, that even without the sun, without the moon, even without fire. Now at this point, some of you may be thinking, oh, even my room, there is no sun, there is no fire, and there is no sun, right? So which means, am I living in spiritual world? No, just to clarify the modern reader, Prabhupada adds this term, electricity. Right now, our dark homes are illuminated with electricity. If you do not have electricity, then everything will become dark. So in fact, not just this room, the entire material world is actually a very, very dark place. If you look at pictures of outer space, what do you see? It's only darkness, infinite darkness. That is the defining factor of this characteristic of this material world. But that spiritual world is fully effulgent and self-illuminated. That is a speciality. So Prabhupada writes something very amazing in this purport to text number 6. While describing this spiritual world, in the 3rd paragraph, Prabhupada writes, one should be captivated by this information, right? Why captivated by this information? Because our consciousness goes where our attention is. There where we are captivated, that is where we invest our mental energies. So when one hears such description of the spiritual world, then what happens? Right? He should desire to transfer himself to that eternal world and extricate himself from the false reflection of reality, like that. Because as long as we are too attached to this material world, it's very difficult to cut that attachment, like that. But if he takes to Krishna consciousness, there's a chance of gradually becoming detached, like that. So very, very powerful point. So this whole description of the spiritual world that is given, that is required to captivate our attention, and that is going to be the pulling force. So the whole description of the spiritual world given is a very, very important information for us to create that attraction. Oh, I want to go to that illuminated place. I don't want to live in this world of darkness. Right? That should be the desire that every reader of the Bhagavad Gita should be created in their heart, like that. So then another very, very powerful section. So after having described this description between matter and spirit, and this whole journey from matter to spirit to the process of detachment and surrender, now the next section from text number 7 through 11, Krishna is going to talk about the nature of the soul, the nature of jiva, and the process of transmigration. Right? So while we heard about, okay, I need to detach myself, but what is my reality? Right? Why am I in this world then? Right? So what is the nature of the soul? Why am I in this world then? Right? That is very, very beautifully described. Right? So even though my original identity is in that spiritual reality, right now my material consciousness in this reflection, in this false reality, but if I'm indeed a product of that spiritual world and my original consciousness is of that spiritual world, right? So then what is my state here? Why am I entangled? Why am I suffering this material world? That is very beautifully described. Very, very important verse, this one, where Krishna explains the nature of the soul in one verse. It says, Mame Vamsho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatanaha. Right? So very, very interesting choice of words Krishna uses. He uses the word Amsha and Sanatana. Right? Sanatana means eternal and Amsha means fragment. So if you put together, this is the exact nature of the jiva. The nature of the jiva is an eternal fragment. Right? Now, this is a very, very important verse because it is actually giving us a description of the relationship, the sambandha or the relationship between the Lord and the jiva or the soul. So what is the relation between the Lord and the soul? The soul is an eternal fragment of the Lord. Right? Now, there is a little bit of a logical problem that we are going to enter now, because the moment you say the word fragment, right? So when by using the word fragment, you are saying that at one point they were together. Like for example, again, take my pen here, and if I just chip off a part of this pen with a knife, right? Then what happens? A small fragment of this plastic comes out, right? So then you will say, oh, if there is a separated fragment, means that they were together. So by using the word fragment, there is an indirect hint that the soul at one point was the same as the Lord. But by using the word eternal, or by using the word eternally separated, right? By eternal fragment means they have always been separate. So by using that word eternal, then one says that the soul, this indirectly indicates that the soul was never one with the Lord. They have been eternally separate. Right? So this is the classical Vedic schools of thought. So this concept of the soul being one with the Lord is what is called as non-dualism. Right? So they are not dual. Soul and the Lord are not two separate things. Non-dualism, or technically called as Advaita in the Sanskritam terminology. And the soul and the Lord are the same is the word dualism. Right? In the Sanskritam, it is called as Dvaita philosophy. Right? So now Krishna is neither committing to Dvaita nor Advaita. Right? If you see carefully, he's saying, he's using the term they are an eternal fragment. It's a combination of both Dvaita and Advaita. So how do you understand this? It can either be a fragment or it can be eternally separate. How can something be an eternally separated fragment? So if you literally translate what Krishna is saying the relationship between soul and the Lord is they are eternally separated parts of the Lord. Right? So this is such a logical incongruity to comprehend. How can something be an eternally separate part? If it was ever a part, then it could not have been eternally separate. And if they were eternally separate, then it cannot be called as a part. So how do I understand this? So in order to understand this concept, I'm going to do a little trick in front of all of you now. Some of you may have noticed this from the beginning of the class. Today, I'm carrying something in my pocket, right? I'm carrying some pens in my pocket. So I want all of you to do a little exercise now. I'm going to ask you all a question and you have exactly 3 seconds to think of an answer. In fact, I'm going to keep the chat box also open and I want you guys to type the answer. So keep your chat box also open, right? So very quickly, right? Fingers on the chat box, fingers on the keyboard. I want you to very quickly in 3 seconds, count the number of pens in my pocket and put it in the chat box. 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1, go. Right? Okay, great. I already have some answers here. Okay. So, all right. Somebody's saying 4, somebody's saying 7. Okay. Right. Okay, there we go. Very nice. Thank you for all your answers. Somebody's saying 6. All right. Very interesting. Let's count now how many pens we have in my pocket. So here you go. Okay. 1, 2, 3, and right, it's definitely not 4, right? But what you saw is just a cap because the pen, I separated it beforehand, right? So you didn't see the pen, you just saw the cap. But here's a very important question for us to ponder over. Why is it that when you saw this cap, you misidentified it as that there has to be the rest of the pen with it? Because this cap shares a very unique relationship with this pen. In fact, for all practical purposes, even right now, when you see this, what do you say? You say, I see a pen. Even when I remove this cap and I show you, you will still say, I see a pen. Which means that this pen actually is complete in itself because the pen will function, right? This pen is a complete whole. And even when this cap comes in union with this pen, or if I may use a term, even when this cap merges with this pen, the pen still remains a pen. right? There's nothing, there's no value actually added to the pen per se. The pen is already complete in itself. But this, because this cap shares a very unique relationship with this pen, the cap has attained a sense of its own fulfillment of purpose being in union with this pen. And another very important point to be noted is that when this cap merged with the pen or came in contact with the pen or came in union with yoga with this pen, the cap did not lose its sense of identity. You still see the cap here, but this cap and pen together, though we still call it as a pen, have formed such a unique bond that the cap is now serving the pen in the purpose for which it is meant for, right? If this cap were to be thrown away somewhere, if you find this cap somewhere lying on the street, you will not call it as a cap. You will just call it as a useless piece of plastic trash, right? So the cap is a cap only as long as it is in union with the pen. The fulfillment of the purpose of the cap is only when it is in union with the pen. This is how the relationship between the soul and the Lord, the Jiva and the Ishvara, the Purusha and the Purushottama or the Param Purusha, the soul and the super soul, can be understood, right? So the Jiva, even in its state of liberation, as we discussed earlier, when the surrender happens and when the liberation happens, when it goes into the spiritual world, or when it enters into that spiritual domain, or when it merges into the spiritual domain, it does not lose its identity, but rather it becomes one in purpose, right, with the pen. And it still maintains a difference in identity. So this concept of eternally separated parts and parts of the Lord is very beautifully described by this philosophy called as simultaneous oneness and difference, which is called as achintya, inconceivable simultaneous oneness and difference. In Sanskritam, it is called as achintya bedha abheda tattva. Achintya bedha. Bedha means difference and abedha means oneness. Tattva, the philosophy. So what exactly is the philosophy of oneness and difference? When the Jiva and Ishvara, when we talk about the oneness, we're talking about their oneness of purpose. But we are talking about a difference in their identity. Just like how the cap still has its own distinct identity. It didn't suddenly just merge and lose its identity when it has come in contact with the pen, right? That is the oneness we are talking about, that they become one in purpose. So the cap gains its value once it is in contact with the pen, or once it is serving the purpose of the pen, right? And still it remains a difference in identity. So this is what, when Krishna is talking about this eternally separated parts of the Lord, they are eternally one. The Jiva and Ishvara, the soul and the Lord, are one in the purpose, but they are separate in terms of their identity, right? And what happens when the cap is separated, right? So this cap, when you see it lying around on the street, you may end up finding some utility for it. Somebody can, in your childhood, if you have played, you can use it as a whistle. Somebody can use it as a whistle, but as you saw, it's such a terrible whistle. Or somebody can use it as a cup to serve something, but it plays a miserable role as a cup. Or somebody can use it as a mug, to water their plants, but it will take you eternity to water your plants if you use it as a cup or as a mug. So basically what I'm trying to say is that when the soul is separated from the Lord, it acquires a false identity, a false name, as a cup, as a mug, as a whistle, but it does not attain true fulfillment in that role. The true fulfillment comes only when it is in union with the pen for the purpose for which it is meant for. So this is the beautiful concept of achintya bedha abheda tattva, or this eternally the sanatana amsha concept, mame vamsha jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatana. But when it experiences that separateness, right now in the material consciousness means, what material consciousness means? When it acquires a false identity or a false ego, what happens? Manaha shashtani indriyani prakrutisthani karshati. It leads to karshan. Karshan means struggle. That is the definition of material life, a life of struggle. And what are we struggling with? Struggling with our mind and the senses. That is because we constantly see our mind is troubling us or our senses are troubling us. That is the definition of material life, right? Why? Because we have forgotten our identity. We have acquired some false identity. We are no more in that loving yoga with the Lord, with the loving union with the Lord, one in purpose of the Lord. So this is the ultimate definition of yoga. To become one in purpose with the Lord is the highest state of yoga. So this is a very, very important verse where Krishna talks about this oneness and difference. Elsewhere, especially in this tradition, which is called the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, this oneness is also defined very beautifully as oneness of quality. Quality in a sense that how the soul also is Sat, Chit and Ananda, and the Ishvara is also Sat, Chit and Ananda. So we all have a spiritual identity, or our nature is spiritual. In that sense, we are one with the Lord, right? But in terms of the difference, there is also a difference in the quantity, right? The classical example given is a drop of ocean and the entirety of ocean. From a qualitative point of view, whatever is the composition of ocean, the mighty vast ocean, is same as the drop of ocean. If you want to test, the percentage of salt, the percentage of water, all it is just take one drop of water from the ocean and you'll get the proportion. And the same thing is there in the entire ocean. So qualitatively, there's oneness, there's similarity in the saltiness of one drop or the ocean. But quantitatively, there's a whole lot of difference. You cannot do surfing on one drop of water. You cannot take a boat and travel, but in an ocean, you can do that. So the purpose which an ocean fulfills cannot be fulfilled by the one drop. So that is the difference between Ishvara and Jiva. So Ishvara and Jiva are one in quality, but they are different in quantity. So like that. So this is a very, very important concept that Krishna talks about in this 7th verse. And continuing further with this concept of transmigration. So because of this false ego and because of the struggling in this material world with the mind and senses, one continues to go through repeated cycle of birth and death. And how does this happen? Right? Very beautifully described in the next verse, in text number 8. Right? Krishna says that how Shariram yad avapnoti yad chapi ukramatishvaraha. So what happens? The living in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. So what happens is that the soul, so here is the material one body, the old body, and here is a new body. And the soul gets transferred, or this transmigration of the soul happens where the soul is packaged in the subtle body. Subtle body here means basically the mind, the intelligence and the false ego, but practically the chitta or the mind is simpler terminology. So packaged with the mind, the soul gets transmigrated from one body to another, just like how aroma is carried in the air. You cannot see the air, but actually you can feel, when somebody is cooking in the kitchen and the smell of that water cooking comes to you, right? How is it happening? The air is carrying it. So likewise, this subtle body is carrying, and of course all of this is happening by the influence of prakriti, right? So material nature is facilitating. So why is this such a important concept? So what exactly do I mean by the subtle body? Subtle body here indicates our impressions, our samskaras or our impressions and associated inclinations. This is what we carry. This is such a powerful proof of transmigration of the soul, because in many world cultures, the concept of soul and reincarnation is not understood, because they feel that, or many people feel that, we start life afresh, and we many times think that whatever impressions that we carry are something that are socially imposed upon us in this particular lifetime, but is not really so. Even at the moment of our birth, we do carry a lot of impressions. That is why two twins born in the same family, given the same upbringing, still they sometimes turn out to be totally different because of certain impressions that the soul has carried from its previous life. So this is the whole transmigration of the soul that is described. And then the living entity thus enters into another gross body, right? So when I use here the word body, we're talking about the gross body here. So it leaves the old gross body. The gross body is this physical body, right? And it gets transferred, and then thus obtains a certain type of eyes, ears, tongue, nose, etc. And thus he enjoys again the new body. This is the whole concept of transmigration, or basically the material bondage. And the problem is, all of this happens in such a smooth manner. The foolish people are not able to see this. That's what we were talking about earlier. Many people can't understand or don't believe in the concept of reincarnation, right? But the foolish cannot understand how this is happening. But vimudha nanu pashyanti jnana chakshusha. So for one to perceive this transmigration, so all of this can be perceived by jnana chakshusha, by the vision of knowledge, jnana. Right? What do you mean by vision of jnana? For a very ignorant person, a gadget like a mobile phone could just be like a hammer or a paperweight. But for somebody who understands how to operate a mobile phone, the potential of a mobile phone, can use it for attending Gita classes, for probably working, for communicating with somebody important, right? So for somebody who has that knowledge, the same device, the same object looks completely different, right? So likewise, for a jnani, or for a person, for a man of knowledge, or for a person of knowledge, one who understands what is this body, what is this mind, they understand this is a powerful tool for my liberation. It is not a tool for my gratification, but is a tool for my liberation. This prakriti is not for my bhoga, but it can potentially be used for my mukti, for my liberation, like that. And therefore, such a endeavoring transcendentalist, yatanto yoginas chainam pashyanti atmani avasthitam, such a person, but those whose minds are not developed and who are not situated in self-realization cannot see. Only those yogis whose mind has been fixed in this, they can only see, like that. So such a this is an important connection that is being spoken of, that how this vision of knowledge is so important, and such a advanced yogi uses this knowledge to as basically, with this knowledge, what happens? The effect of this knowledge is one utilizes one's body and mind. One utilizes body and mind as a vehicle for liberation. As a vehicle for liberation, right? And then, of course, right, this is the detachment part. Remember, going back to our theme, there are two things we're talking about. There's detachment and also attachment. So if understanding this difference between body and soul, the jnana part, remember, all of this is the same as the jnana that we discussed in the second chapter. Remember, where in Bhagavad Gita did we talk about the difference in body and soul, right? In the second chapter, right? So while this is the detachment part, the pushing force, What is that pulling force that we need? The pulling force that we need is bhakti. So what is that pulling force? That is again going to be described in the next section. So from text number 12 to 15, Krishna is going to talk about this, the same bhakti part, the Bhagavat Aishwarya Gyan that we spoke about, Bhagavat Aishwarya. Or the knowledge of Krishna, or more, knowledge of Krishna's supremacy. Knowledge of Krishna's supremacy is going to be highlighted again. Right? Again, the theme that we saw in the 7th chapter, in the 9th chapter, in the 10th chapter, again, a very quick summary of that is going to come now. So what he says, what are the opulences Krishna says? That Yad Adityagatam Tejo Jagatam Bhashate Akhilam Yat Chandram Se Yat Chagnau Tat Tejo Vidhi Mamakam. So Krishna says, I am the splendor of the sun and the moon. Something that we already discussed in the 7th chapter. Splendor of the sun, the moon, the fire, all of this is coming from Krishna. So Krishna is very explicitly talking about that in this chapter, right? Again, then next he says, is he just that invisible splendor? No, even I am that visible greatness also, right? Because one can see the light, but is it just some, because light is an energy, but is there some factual matter also associated with that? Yes. Gam avishucha bhutani dharayami aham ojasa. Krishna also says that I also enter into each planet, and in the form of gravity, I hold them up. I ensure that they stay in orbit. And then he says, Pushnami Chaushada Sarva Soma Bhuto Rasatmakam. Not only as that, but in the form of moon, Krishna supplies nutrition. He embeds nutrition, or he fills nutrition into all vegetables and herbs. In fact, this is a very popular Vedic technique. It's called as lunar plantation, a very traditional Vedic farming technique, where understanding that the moon is what that is giving nourishment. Sun increases the growth, the size, but the internal nourishment is something that is coming from moon rays. So there's a whole system of Vedic farming where you synchronize the plantation, the plucking, the harvesting according to the moon phases, like that. It's a deep science, but that is in line with this concept that Krishna is talking about here. And then he continues further. Then Krishna, are you just those far off planets and galaxies and sun and moon and the gravity? Are you just that? No, I'm even closer than the closest. Aham Vaishvanaro Bhutva. Even that food that you eat, Krishna says that he is the digestive power. Vaishvanara is a kind of an Agni, a fire which is there in our stomach. There are varieties of Agni. There's a particular Agni that is used for cooking. There's a particular Agni that we invoke when we are doing a fire sacrifice and yagya. There's a particular Agni that we invoke when the body needs to be cremated, right? And there is a particular Agni. This is Vaishvanara Agni who accepts the food that we eat and who digests it and provides and converts it as energy for this body, right? And then praninam deham ashita prana apana samo bhuktva. And after having digested the food, the energy which comes, Krishna transfers it in the form of our life air, prana and apana. So Krishna is also our life air. Samo bhutva pachami annam chaturvidham. This is how Krishna is helping us in the entire digestive process. He is digesting the food, transferring energy throughout the entire body. So not only is he managing the gigantic sun, moon, and the planets in the galaxies, he's also managing our own body from the infinite to the infinitesimal. Krishna is only doing, maintaining everything. And then he says, forget all that. Sarvasa chaham hridi sannivishta matha smriti jnanam upanancha. I am seated in everybody's heart as Paramatma. And as Paramatma, what is doing? That mattaha smriti jnanam aponam cha. Smriti. Smriti means remembrance. Mattaha smriti jnanam, knowledge, and apohana. Apohana means forgetfulness. Right? All of these are also coming from Paramatma. Now, some of you may be wondering why forgetfulness. Remembrance, we understand it is important. Knowledge, of course, very much important. Why is Krishna providing us forgetfulness? Actually, just like how remembrance and forgetful knowledge are also Krishna's mercy, forgetfulness is also Krishna's mercy. Can you just imagine? Sometimes it becomes so burdensome to carry the scars of this one lifetime. If that forgetfulness was not there, we will have to remember our goof ups, our scars, our traumas from all the past lifetimes. So, in a sense, forgetfulness is such an important thing. There's a very famous saying that how, it says, I do not remember the things that I wish not to forget, and I do not forget the things that I wish to. So, there are many things that we wish to forget, right? If that Paramatma's grace is not there, if that forgetfulness is not there, then we would literally be like living zombies, completely traumatized. So that forgetfulness also is a very important aspect that Paramatma is giving us. And then he says, Vedesha sarver ahameva vedyo vedantakrit vedavideva chaham. So Krishna is the compiler of Vedas. Is a compiler of Vedas, Vedantakrit, and Vedesha sarver ahameva vedyo. The whole object of study of Vedas, the goal of Vedic study or the goal of Vedas, Vedesha sarver aham eva vedya, to know Krishna. To know Krishna is the whole goal of Vedas. So this is a very, very important verse, which Prabhupada would many times quote, right? That the goal of Vedas is to ultimately know Krishna, right? So with this few verses from 12, 13, 14, 15, these 4 verses, Krishna has once again established his supreme position, right? And then after presenting that, now the entire summary of Vedanta, Krishna is going to present in just 5 verses. Again, very, very powerful section. Text number 16 to 20 as a summary of this chapter and all. He is going to summarize summary of Vedanta philosophy. Veda Anta. Vedanta itself means a conclusive truth. And now he's summarizing the entire Vedanta. So what is that summary? So in 4 verses, in text number 16, right? So what is Krishna saying here? Very, very important verses. In fact, this section of Bhagavad Gita is also, it is as important as the Chatushloki Bhagavad Gita that we studied in the 16th chapter, in the 10th chapter, from text number 8, 9, 10, 11. Right? So what does he say? That Dvau imau purushau loke kshara akshara evacha. So the Purushas, Dvaya means 2. So there are 2 kinds of Purushas. One are called as Kshara. Kshara means fallible, or in our simple terms, the conditioned souls. Those who are conditioned to this material life. Dvau imau purushau loke kshara akshara. Akshara means infallible, fallible. Means those who are liberated. So there are the conditioned souls and there are the liberated souls. Dvau imau purushau loke kshara akshara evacha. Kshara sarvani bhutani means all the living entities in material world. So conditioned souls are there in the material world. And kutastho akshara uchyate. Kutastha here means those who are in that oneness or in that remember when I use the word oneness, go back to our understanding in text number 7, Mamayavamsha Jiva Loke. So in that oneness of purpose. So those souls who have become one in purpose are the liberated souls, right? Again, do not misunderstand that they have become one in identity, but they have become one in purpose. So these are the two kinds of souls. Dvaivimau Purusha Loke, there Kshara and Akshara Evacha. Kshara, Sarvani Bhutani, all the conditioned souls in the material world, including bacteria to you and me, we all come in the category of the Kshara Purushas. And those who are living the liberated, eternally liberated spiritual world, they are the Aksharas. That is the first key concept that in text number 16 Krishna talks about. Then he says, Uttama Purushastutva Anyaha Paramatmeti Udahritaha. Beyond these two Kshara and Ikshara, Kshara and Akshara Jivas, there is a Uttama Purusha. Uttama means there is a supreme person, supreme Purusha. Uttama Purushastutva Anyaha. And what is he known as? He is known as a Paramatma. Paramatmeti Udahrita. It is Udahrita means he is called as the Paramatma. Yo Lokatrayam Avishya Bibharti Avyaya Ishvaraha. So what is this Paramatma doing? He is the Supreme Lord who has entered these three worlds. Three worlds means the upper, middle, and lower. Basically, he has entered this material world and he is maintaining them. Maintaining it. So a concept again which we studied, remember in the 10th chapter, where Krishna says, the last verse he says that Ekamshena Sthita. What to speak of all these opulences? By my one fragment, I'm maintaining this whole creation. Right? So Krishna is reiterating those points. Again, remember, as I mentioned earlier, this 15th chapter is a summary of the entire key concept from the Bhagavad Gita. Right? So we understood now that there is this Paramatma who has entered this world and is maintaining this entire world. And now, a very key verse coming our way, text number 18, Krishna says, Yasmat Ksharam Atitoham Aksharat Api Chottamaha Atosmi Loke Vedecha Pratitaha Purushottamaha. Yasmat, because Kshara Atito Aham. So, me, what about Krishna? What about Krishna's position? Krishna, he says, he is beyond both. He is beyond both the Kshara that we spoke here and the Akshara that we spoke here. So Krishna says he is beyond both the fallible and infallible living entities. He is transcendental to both of them. And Atosmi Loke Vedecha Pratitaha Purushottamaha. And I am known as the greatest. Right? I am known as the greatest. And I am celebrated in this world, both the worlds, as the Purushottama. Remember the word Purushottama? That's how we title this chapter as Purushottama Yoga. Right? So this word Purushottama, remember how did I divide it as? It is Purusha plus Uttama. It becomes Purushottama, Gunasandhi. So this, look at these two words here. Purusha, Purusha. Uttama, Uttama. Right? So indirectly, Krishna is saying, I am that Paramatma. I am that supreme maintainer of this whole world. Right? And I am beyond both the Kshara and Akshara. So even the liberated soul also doesn't become Krishna. I am beyond that also. Just like how we discussed in the example of the pen is full in itself. The cap does not become the pen, right? Or the pen in no way becomes less separated from the cap, right? Likewise, Krishna is full in himself because he's Purushottama, because he's beyond both the Kshara and Akshara living entities. So this is the essence of Vedanta. that Krishna is summarizing here. And then he says, Yomam evam asammudho janati purushottama. Very, again, very, very important words. So here in 16, 17 and 18, what did we understand? So basically the signs of our relationship. So 16, 17 and 18 is basically talking of the signs of our relationship with the Lord. If you remember, we used this term last time, we called it as sambandha. In the 10th chapter, we used the specific term, sambandha gyan, or sambandha means relationship, right? And now in text number 19, now that I know this sambandha, what is it abhideya? Abhideya, or what is the action that I need to perform? Right? So that is Yomam evam asammudho janati purushottama. One who knows me as that Purushottama, who's beyond, who's infallible, who's beyond these both Kshara and Akshara, sa sarvavid bhajati mam. Sarva bhavena bharata. So he does my bhajan. So he does bhajan or worships Krishna. Worships Krishna. And what? How? Sarva bhavena. With all of one's consciousness, with all of one's intention, right? Or in other words, worships Krishna fully. Prabhupada translates, whoever knows me as the Supreme Personality of Godhead without doubting is a knower of everything. He therefore engages himself in full devotional service to me. Right? O Arjuna, sarva bhavena bharata. O Arjuna, son of Bharata, this is what one does. Right? So this is so when, remember again, when the sambandha is there, then the abhideya naturally follows. And what is it, that abhideya? The process of bhajan, or the process of devotional service, right? So that action of devotional service, right? And then what happens in the end? What does one gain? So the prayojana. So the prayojana is very beautifully described here. So if sambandha is a relationship, abhideya is the action, prayojana is the end goal, the goal or the destination of the spiritual journey. So what is the destination? He says, iti guhyatamam shastram idam uktam mayanaga. Oh Arjuna, this is the most confidential part of the Vedic scriptures. This part of Krishna's supremacy is not so openly spoken about, because the Vedas mainly talk about Brahman. In fact, they many times even don't explicitly talk about the Brahman. Majority of the Vedas talk about the Devatas. The Rig Veda talks about Indra Puja, Vayu, Agni, and so on. And if you go into Upanishads, it talks about the Brahman. Many people understand, they think that is Vedanta. Vedanta is not just the study of Brahman or the impersonal Brahman, but the more secret part is that how that one supreme absolute truth is simultaneously understood as Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, as that all-pervading absolute truth Brahman, as that localized Uttama Purusha Paramatma, and as that Bhagavan, that supreme personality as Purushottama Krishna, right? So idam guhyatamam shastram idam uktam mayanaga etad buddhva buddhiman syat kritakritascha bharata. So what is the destination? What happens to such a person? One who understands this confidential part, which is disclosed by me, will become wise, and all his endeavors will know perfection. Wise, and all of one's endeavors will lead to perfection. Perfection, or the prayojan, the perfection of one's action. That is prayojan. Or in other words, one will attain to that higher state, the desired destination that has been spoken of here. So with this, in essence, that is what whole Vedanta is talking about. That is a whole summary of Vedanta. Understand your position, understand what to do, and finally get out of this world, attain your higher destination, the spiritual world. Like that, in just 5 verses, Krishna has summarized entire Vedanta. That is why you see this is such a powerful chapter. Practically everything that we need to know in terms of what is my real purpose of existence is summarized in this one chapter. You need not know anything more. So if you found the entire Bhagavad Gita very complicated so far, just understand this one chapter. You have understood everything and more as well, like that. All right. So these are some key points which I wanted to share with respect to this chapter. Very quickly, let me summarize the entire flow of this chapter. So we began the 15th chapter, Purushottama Yoga, or the Yoga of the Supreme Person. So in the 13th chapter, we saw how the Purusha gets bound to this Prakriti and becomes a limited Kshetragya, one who's just aware of this body, that's all, the knower of this body, Kshetragya. And what is binding the Purusha's consciousness to this body are the 3 gunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. So how do one liberate oneself? By taking shelter of this Purushottama, by surrendering to this Purushottama. So that concept of surrender is explained in the beginning by describing the nature of this world and the nature of the spiritual world, right? So the whole journey from matter to spirit is summarized in the first 6 verses. So so Krishna begins by describing this inverted banyan tree, which is basically this false world, or when I use the word false, not in the context that is an illusion, but rather our experience that we acquire from this world is lacking substance. That is what we mean by the word false reality or an illusory reality. Our experience is an illusion because it lacks real substance. It is only a semblance of happiness that we get, but not the real happiness. Therefore, we have to cut down this tree of this material world. With determination, we have to cut down with the weapon of detachment. But then detachment is only half the task. That is the pushing force. We also need the pulling force, which comes through developing complete attachment to the Lord. And how does that attachment come? By knowing the spiritual world. That information of the spiritual world should captivate our consciousness and create a desire wanting to enter that world. Merely disgust of this world is not going to liberate us from this world. We also need to develop that attachment, the desire to enter into the spiritual world. That is when we attain perfection of liberation. And that is what is the whole understanding of the surrender to the absolute truth means. Both healthy detachment and complete attachment to the Lord. Healthy detachment from this material world and complete spiritual attachment to the Lord. Both are very important, and that is what real surrender means. If you only have spiritual attachment without detachment from this world, that is incomplete. Or if you only have detachment without having material attachment, that is also incomplete, right? So that is the understanding of surrender. Then why am I in this? What is binding me to this world? There we understood what exactly is my true identity. We are that eternally separated parts and parts of the Lord. So there is a philosophy of simultaneous oneness and difference. We are one in purpose with the Lord, but we are different in our identity. We are one in quality with the Lord, but we are different in quantity with the Lord. And because we are in this conditioned state, we are experiencing that difference in purpose. Because of our false ego, we are struggling because of our mind and senses. That is the reality of this material world. And once we are stuck in this material consciousness, the soul gets transmigrated from one body to another, or its identification with the body keeps changing, and the material nature arranges this transmigration to happen through the means of the subtle body. We carry our impressions from one lifetime to another lifetime, and we get entangled in this whole cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease, right? But then we need to understand that with the vision of knowledge, one can perceive this reality. And such a person understand that the body and mind are my vehicle for liberation, not my vehicle for gratification and further entanglement in this world. So that was the jnana part. But then, or the knowledge that is leading to detachment. But then I also need the devotion, that spiritual attachment. How does that come? I need to know the Supreme Lord. And we saw a summary of all the opulences of Krishna, very brief summary in the 4 verses from text number 12 to 15. Then finally, the entire game plan. What am I supposed to do? Finally, right? The Sambandha, Abhidheya, and Prayojan. What is the Sambandha? Who am I? What is my position? So the living entities, Purushas, are of two types: conditioned and liberated, Kshara and Akshara. But beyond these two, there is an Uttama Purusha, the Paramatma who's running this world. And who's that Paramatma? Krishna himself. He is Purushottama. So one who understands that, one begins Sarva Bhavena, Bharata. One Sarvavid Bhajati Mam. One does bhajan. One engages in worship of the Lord fully, completely. And one who does that, such a person becomes wise, and all their endeavors will attain to perfection. That is the ultimate goal, or the prayojan. All right. So let's stop our discussion here, and let's see if anybody has any questions or comments regarding today's class. Yeah. Okay. Somebody already asked a question here. I think they sent me a direct message. Okay. At some point, I think some of you, I'm not sure if you lost the screen share. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, so the one question that we saw here is that if both are one in purpose, so what is that purpose? Yes, very good question. That purpose is the dharma of the soul, or the nature of the soul, is to have an exchange of loving service. Technically, it is called as rasa, right? But to simplify that concept, it is the concept of exchanging loving service. So just like how the living entity wants to serve the Lord also wants to serve the living entity, and that mutual exchange is this beautiful bhakti rasa, or the mellow of devotion. That is the ultimate purpose of the living entity, and the Lord also. In fact, the Lord creates the living entities for the exchange of that rasa, or to experience that rasa, like that. Okay. Yes, Gail, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you so much.
Great.
This chapter, I think 15, I think you characterized it as the essence of the Gita. So I wonder how this chapter is the essence. So how would you characterize, therefore, chapter 2 or 18, which also seem to comprise?
Yeah. Because, see, chapter 2 also, we said, is the summary of the entire Bhagavad Gita. 18 is also summary of the Bhagavad Gita. But there are a lot of extra details. Like sometimes there is a science and there's a very applied technology. Like, tell me what to do. So this chapter, that way, is like a very clear-cut action plan. What am I supposed to do? What are the bare minimum things I need to know, and what is the exact specific action plan that I need to do? That way, 15th chapter covers it all. Like that. That's what I meant. Yeah. When we said
so it's more like laser.
Yeah. Exactly. In just 20 verses, you are getting the full punch. You can't miss. And there's nothing you missed out. In this specific chapter, and you cannot go wrong just by focusing on this one chapter alone.
Yeah. Okay. Also, when you asked us, when you had the pens in your pocket, and then we saw that the one was just only the cap, and you asked us, why did we perceive the cap as the whole pen? And I don't remember what the answer you gave was. Why did we see because I had one answer in my head, and I think you gave another answer. Do you remember what you said as the answer?
Yeah, I said that usually we identify this cap with the pen. In fact, this piece of plastic is called as a cap because it shares a relationship with the pen. Right? Like I have another piece of plastic here in front of me, but we don't call this as a cap.
Yes.
Right? So so likewise, the jiva shares a relationship with Ishvara, right? That was the point I was trying to draw, the analogy I was trying to draw there.
Mm-hmm. So we thought that it was a whole pen because we were thinking that the actual pen was attached, even though it wasn't.
Because usually, we identify this as a whole, right? Usually the cap is never independent of the whole.
Okay.
Like that.
Okay, yeah. And then also, can you make draw a distinction for me between consciousness, which is awareness, and attention, which I don't know if it comes from the, it seems that we always speak of attention in connection with the mind, but I think attention comes from the soul. So yeah, is there any significant distinction between these two terms?
See, the mind is the channel which the soul, a medium which the soul uses to interact with matter. And the consciousness of the soul is a concept which I'm quoting from the Yoga Sutras. Patanjali talks about this. He says that the mind in itself is not alive. It is a consciousness of the soul which makes the mind alive. And many times we feel that the mind is alive, but it is not. It is also inert matter. But the nature of the mind is, it is not as dumb, as gross as physical matter, nor is it alive and cognizant like the soul. It is quasi, in between, right? And because why is it quasi? It is what that is used as a channel for the consciousness of the soul to enter and make sense of this world. So to give you an analogy of that, imagine if I have a light bulb and a film around it, right? So
yeah,
the film in itself has no, brightness, effulgence coming out of it. But when the light of the bulb goes through that film, that's when it becomes alive or effulgent. So when we use the word attention, we are specifically talking about a mental energy, a mental function, right? Or the conditioned soul's ability to focus through its conditioned mind is attention. Right? Whereas consciousness is something that is native to the soul, and it is that consciousness, when diverted through the mind, manifests as attention.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, so consciousness, let's say, before it goes through the I don't know if I want to call it the interface of the mind, it's simply called consciousness, but once it passes through the mind, say as a filter or something, then it's called attention.
Yeah, as a mental function, you can just call it that way, because technically, of course, I'm giving you a slightly simplified understanding, but technically from a Vedantic perspective, there is a term called chitta, which means conditioned consciousness, and this conditioned consciousness starts working through these internal tools of the mind, intelligence, and the ego, right? So and when we use the term attention there, we are specifically talking about a composite effect of all of this in our day-to-day interaction with this outside world, or even our inside world, but in the world in general. Yeah. So for simple understanding would be consciousness coming through the mind as a function of the mind is attention. Simple, period.
But as you were saying, the attention is really maybe a composite of the chitta, false ego, mind.
All of them. Yes.
Mind. Yeah. Okay. Is it I don't know if this matters which way we say it. Do we say that it is the soul that carries the subtle body during transmigration, or is it the subtle body that carries the soul? Does it matter which way you say?
Actually, it's neither. Prakriti packages that soul in, when I say soul, again, soul's consciousness, or Prakriti facilitates the whole operation of the soul's consciousness being, influenced by the subtle body and the transmigration to take place.
Okay,
Prakriti
so
is doing that role. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's neither, it's Prakriti.
Yeah, so Prakriti is that postmaster who put the envelope, the letter in the envelope and has transferred it from one point to another point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and also when we say that the conditioned soul is fallible, normally this word fallible denotes that something is like vulnerable to breakage or something. So when we say that the conditioned soul is kshara, what should we understand about this word fallible in this connection?
So fallible in English language also means, something that is prone to error, prone to be in a state where it is not meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So right now, there's a whole error happening in the universe. Our material life itself is a cosmic error. We are not meant to be here. This is an aberration in the cosmos. This is the spirit soul who so, somehow it is falsely identifying with this body and mind. So that is a fallibility that we are exhibiting right now. Right? So that is that. So in that sense, the word kshara is appropriate there, or fallible is appropriate there.
Okay, and one of the verses in this chapter, I think it said, when we come to know the Supreme Lord, we will surrender to Him. And
text number 4. Yeah.
Yeah, I might have asked you this before, but I don't remember your answer if you did answer. Whenever I see this verse, I immediately think of Shukracharya, who knew who the Lord was, yet he was not inclined for surrender. So I never understand why we would necessarily surrender if we knew that Krishna was God or the absolute truth.
Again, knowing Krishna is not like information knowing Krishna, but realized knowledge of Krishna. Like what happened to Arjuna at the end of text number 11 of 10th chapter. He developed that spiritual conviction, right? And then immediately he glorified, oh Krishna, now I understood. You are that Param Purusha, Parandhama. You are the supreme person. You are the supreme abode. All the great sages are glorifying you, right? So when we talk about people like Shukracharya and so on, they had knowledge, right? But knowledge necessarily doesn't ensue surrender. That is the difference between jnana and bhakti.
Yeah. So therefore, what is the nature of this knowledge that's in text 4 then?
Yeah. So here, so this is so here it is not just knowledge, but it is actually that kind of a realized knowledge by which one develops that kind of a deep connection with the Lord, right? That is why when, this is leading to ultimately that surrender. So that knowledge of attachment to the Lord. If you go back to our drawing, I said there's a pushing force and the pulling force. Mm-hmm. The pushing part was, the misery of this world, the detachment, etc. etc. The pulling part is the knowledge. And that knowledge we spoke about, Krishna spoke about that, he gave a mini summary of his opulences, right? In text number 12 to 15, he spoke about that. So that is that knowledge as well. The Sambandha knowledge as well, both of them. Yeah.
Yeah, because so when we talk when we talk about knowledge here, we're really talking about the soul's attraction and devotion, which doesn't sound like knowledge. Is that devotion or attraction out of to a person's loving nature doesn't sound like where you would use this word knowledge, you know?
Well, you know, you need to know about a person to develop a relationship with that person. That is what the whole sambandha gyan that we spoke about, right? So knowing that person is very important. That is a knowledge. That sambandha knowledge is what is very important. That we began that, right? 16, 17, 18. We called that also sambandha gyan. So that sambandha knowledge is what that is. Again, the moment we use the word knowledge, immediately, like the word jnana or knowledge has multiple connotations in Bhagavad Gita. At one level, it means just the difference between body and soul. Or at one level, it may even mean how to work in this world, knowledge of work, what we saw in the 4th chapter. Knowledge can also mean theoretical information about Krishna. And knowledge also means realized understanding of Krishna. So we're talking about that last level where one understands Krishna, his relationship, his position, and now wants to develop that relationship. So knowledge naturally has to culminate into wanting to develop a relationship or bhakti. That is a knowledge we are talking about here.
Okay, now it makes sense. Is knowing knowing somebody rather than just knowing about somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's nicely put. Thank you.
Just this one last thing is about the leaves of this upside down tree, which is the Vedas, right? Yeah, the Vedas I always think of as spiritual because, they're like a manifestation of Krishna. But yet we're supposed to cut down this tree. So I'm just wondering why the Vedas, which are spiritual, would be considered part of this upside down material tree. And therefore we're supposed to cut it down. That means including cutting down the Vedas then.
See, understand that Vedas are also talking about the dharma, artha, kama, moksha aspect. If you remember, even the 2nd chapter, Krishna says, Traigunyo Vishya Veda. In text number 46, he talks about this, that how ultimately majority of the Vedas are talking about, worldly profit and gain, and they are under the influence of the 3 gunas. So we have to rise past that and focus within the Vedas about this part. The same Vedanta which Krishna spoke about in the end of this chapter is also part of Vedas. So we are interested in that part of the Vedas, which is helping us connect to Krishna. But the other part, we want to cut off. Then why did Krishna give all the other part? Because that is also his mercy. Because if he doesn't give us a legitimate way of operating in this world, we will end up harming ourselves more and incriminating ourselves more in this world. Or in other words, we would end up living a very animalistic life. So at least the Rajasic and the Sattvic part of the Vedas are at least helping us live a legitimate life, so that even we know how to enjoy properly, not like animals, right? But that in itself is not the main goal. Therefore, we want to cut that out and focus on the true essence of the Veda, the true purpose of the Veda. That's why he mentioned, right? Vedesha sarver ahamema vedya. In text number 15, it says the goal of Vedas is to know me, not to enjoy the leaves and the fruits of the tree, but knowing Krishna and developing that sambandha. Again, knowledge of Krishna, the same answer which we discussed earlier.
Okay, so therefore the leaves doesn't refer to the Vedas in their entirety.
Yeah,
right? Just that part.
Right. That's why I remember I wrote dharma, artha, kama, moksha around it, around those leaves. So we're talking about that part of the Vedas.
Okay, Prabhu. Thank you for your patience and perfect answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna. Yes, Arvindji, would you like to unmute yourself?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Bol.
Thank you very much. It was very beautiful, actually, the way you mentioned. This is a Vedanta summary. Yeah, thank you for this. Hello, are you able to listen?
Yes, Prabhu, please go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, Prabhu, can you hear me? Maybe you should increase your volume. We are all able to hear your question.
Haribol?
Yes, Prabhu. We can hear you. Please go ahead with your question. We can hear you, Arvindji. Please go ahead with your question. Okay. Okay. While he, anybody else would like to type any questions or would like to ask any questions? Okay, I think we have another question from Alokji. Would you like to ask your question meanwhile?
Yeah, Prabhu, Dhanwad Pranam Prabhuji.
And
This 20 number verses wherein it is said that it is the summary and the secret of the Vedanta. Can you just the explanation which you give Purush, Paramatma, Atma Paramatma, and then this Purushottam, it was not very clear. I mean, can you just illustrate this secret once again?
Right, right. Okay. So, in essence, what is the whole game plan of this material world is to allow us to recognize our real identity, that is called Sambandha, and then having recognized that identity, act in a way where we are now able to fully realize our state, that is the Abhideya, the practice part, and ultimately reach our destination, which is beyond this world, which is the Prayojan. So these are the three concepts of Sambandha, Abhideya, and Prayojana. So the first three verses, 16, 17, and 18 verses, they spoke about our Sambandha, which is basically how there are two kinds of living entities. There is a conditioned soul and there is a liberated soul. But do not think that liberated soul is God. There is somebody beyond these two who is known as Paramatma, who is running this whole world. And who is that Paramatma? Krishna himself. So indirectly, Krishna, the Supreme Lord, is the first understanding. And how we are different from Krishna is also important understanding, part of the Sambandha Gyan. Then, okay, now that I have understood that, what am I supposed to do? Bhajanti Mam Sarva Bhavena Bharata. One should do bhajan of Krishna. Bhajan means, literally worshipping Krishna, rendering devotional service unto him with full consciousness. That was Abhideya part. So there's a practice part. And then what happens eventually? That what we saw when Krishna, he just says that Kritakritasya, one will attain perfection. What is the perfection? We saw in the previous verses earlier in the chapter, he talks about attaining the spiritual world where there is no sun, no moon, no fire, no electricity, right? And yad gatva nivartate tad dhama paramamama. One who goes there never comes back. So that is the goal. So this is the essence of Vedanta. Because the whole point of Vedanta is, again, understanding from the broader spiritual context. Traditionally, Vedanta is something studied by the renounced order, especially the sannyasis, so that because they are now in that last phase of their life where they are now fully working on their spiritual upliftment and attaining that higher state, right? So that's why it is a Vedanta. It is a conclusive knowledge. Anta of all Veda. Veda means knowledge. Anta means ending or conclusion. So why ending? Because now there is nothing more need to be known. Now the only thing left is, attaining the spiritual world. So in that way, Vedanta classically has developed the connotation that, this is the knowledge that will help me get out of this world. And that process has been summarized in brief by Krishna. That's what I mentioned there as a summary of Vedanta from text 16 to 20, like that. Does it make sense? Hello, Prabhu.
Prabhuji, it is making sense. Prabhuji, just a slightly little standard question. So the impression is like the objective is to worship God and go to the Supreme Godhead, but then does it also connote that we should also not enjoy this worldly life? I mean, is it sort of pessimistic, some sort of sort of sounds like pessimism, wherein do not enjoy this life, but then aspire for the uh, 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 godly abode. So
Right, right,
how can we take it a right perspective? I mean, the
right.
God has given this life to probably for enjoyment also, but how can we have the right enjoyment here as well as attaining that objective also?
You asked a very good question in the end. In your statement, you said, what is right enjoyment? In fact, understanding what is right enjoyment is the real question that we need to ask ourselves. In fact, the only purpose of life is to enjoy. This statement may bewilder many of you, right? In fact, Anandamayo Bhyasat, the nature of the soul and the Supreme Lord is to seek Ananda. Rasovai Saha, he is the enjoyer of Rasa. And because we are part and parcel of him, we are also, and want to enjoy that Rasa. But that real enjoyment comes, again, the whole reason why I gave this pen and the cap example is, the cap, as long as it thinks it is independent of the pen and acquires this false identities, it can never be happy. The cap is never happy as a cup. The cap is never happy as a mug. The cap is never happy as a whistle, right? The cap can only be happy when it is lovingly serving the pen. And this is a concept that can bewilder many of us, that actually the real joy in this world is in service, is in selfless service. Because that is the role where we are truly in line with our original nature. But unfortunately, because of the exploitative masters we have served in this world, the moment we think of the word service, we may think of some kind of a bondage. And that is the thing we need to reset in our head, that service is not bondage, but service is an expression of love. When there is a bond of love, service becomes the highest expression of joy, right? And if you have had such a relationship, you will understand that, like the closest example that the scriptures quote is that of the bond between a mother and a child, right? So the mother is selflessly serving the child and she's experiencing that joy constantly. And she is going out of her way. Externally, one may say she is bound in, she has become like a bonded labor to that child, right? But that is only an external vision. But anybody who has experienced motherhood will know that there is joy in that service, like that. So this is a paradigm shift that we need to bring. Therefore, the real purpose is what we emphasized, that Sanatana Amsha, we are that Sanatana Amsha, we are one in purpose with the Lord. We want to serve the purpose of the Lord by aligning our life with the purpose of the Lord, and by serving the Lord, we experience more happiness. And this is the very, very esoteric understanding of the Vedanta. In fact, one of the hallmarks of the esoteric bhakti tradition, especially in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition that ISKCON follows, is elaboration on this concept. And how can service give more joy? That is what is exhibited in the life of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Who is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? He is Krishna himself, who has come to experience the joy of service. God himself wanted to understand, why is it that my devotees are more happy than me? Technically, I am the one who's enjoying all the service, but I see they are more happy than me. So just to experience this mystic, esoteric understanding of the joy of service, God himself comes in the form of a devotee to experience the joy of this bhakti rasa. These are little topics beyond perhaps our limited discussion, but understand that there is greater joy in service than to be served, to get experience service. So that is the real purpose, and that is where real joy is, right? So I hope that gave some deeper insight to your question. So I think Arvindji, if you're able to hear us, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Yeah, go ahead.
Prabhu, I want to ask that you mentioned that as a soul, we are eternally separated parts of Krishna. So logically it is like sometimes I get difficult to understand this. Like Krishna has expanded himself in there is Alladini potency, Samvit potency, like Vasudev, Radharani and Balramji, like service. So Krishna himself expanded for that, and we are also like the eternally separated parts. So like how can someone is a source and at the same time all these parts are eternally existed already? So how can someone is a source at the same time they are already existed? So
the reason why this becomes difficult for us to comprehend is because our understanding of logic is operating under the dominion of time. Time, which is the cause and effect, which defines a cause and effect phenomena, which says that first there has to be the cause, then there is the effect. But the moment you enter into a timeless world, cause and effect can happen simultaneously. Right? Because right now our thinking is limited by time, we cannot understand this concept. But the spiritual world is a world without time, where cause and effect can happen simultaneously. Sometimes the effect can also happen before the cause, and still the cause will be the cause. Right? Therefore, these are trans-logic things. When I say trans-logic, or rather say when a word achintya is used, it is not just a what should I say, an excuse to not understand, but rather achintya in itself is a deep concept to understand, because it is a logic or a trans logic beyond the world of time. Right? So therefore, right now our understanding is within the purview of past, present and future under the influence of gunas. But when you go beyond the gunas, these concepts are naturally revealed. That is how our acharyas explain these concepts. So therefore, it is not of, otherwise, if Krishna himself is restricted to certain rule, then the rule becomes God, because it is ruling over God.
Yes.
Right? So this is how our acharyas explain when Krishna is Swarat. So all these things are possible.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. So let this be the last question. Thank you all so much for joining us in today's discussion. I hope we got some deeper insights and a quick crash course in what we need to do finally. However, Gita is not over here again. This may also seem like another ending, but after giving this crash course of the Bhagavad Gita or the whole spiritual game plan in this chapter, in the next 2 chapters, Krishna is going to create a framework. How do I understand? How do I apply this? How do I internalize these concepts? So that is going to be chapter 16 and 17 that we'll see in the next couple of days. So thank you very much for joining us. Let's now conclude with the closing mantras. Joining your palms together. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So thank you all very much. See you all in the next session. Hare Krishna.